Now, a leading steel expert has told this programme the situation in the industry is desperate at the moment and that it will need public money to survive. The news comes as the plight of the industry, which supports thousands of jobs in Wales, was raised with the Prime Minister this week. Our parliamentary correspondent, Ione Wells, has the story.
It's been nearly 2 months since 10 Welsh MPs wrote to the Chancellor asking for extra support for the steel industry during coronavirus. But as shops start reopening and pressure builds on the government to outline plans for the UK's economic recovery, big questions still remain about the part steel will play in our economic bounce back.
3 months into this crisis and still companies are still waiting for government liquidity support. It's critical. Will the Prime Minister commit to address this now?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady because we take this issue in the UK steel industry very, very seriously. We're doing everything we can to maintain UK steel production, though clearly it was always facing difficulties even before Corona struck.
Demand for steel has dropped massively, especially for industries like car making. But even before the pandemic, Tata Steel alone suffered £371 million in pre-tax losses last year. And there was continuing uncertainty because of Brexit.
Because we've got uncertainty building on uncertainty now. So the position of the steel industries is quite desperate at the moment. And they certainly will need government support to survive. They would have needed government support without the pandemic. But now, if they are to weather this particular storm, then they are going to need support. The question is, as you've said, this is taxpayers' money. The question is this, as it would be for some industries, a bridge over the pandemic crisis, or is it a bridge over the pandemic crisis only to find that the economic situation post-pandemic is much more serious globally than we might imagine?
There are reports that the UK government may consider so-called last resort loans for companies if their failure would harm the economy. But ministers will want some certainty any loan will be paid back. MPs representing steel communities said the money would come back if that support is given now.
There are 4,000 relatively well-paid men and women working in the Port Talbot steel works, thousands and thousands more relatively well-paid jobs in the steel industry across the country. Imagine the cost of losing those jobs. So we are saying to the government, give the temporary loan. It is a loan. It will be paid back by the company that you loan to in order to avoid the massive cost of doing nothing.
But beyond the hard economic figures lies the effect on areas like Port Talbot.
It would take a very brave government decision to say we don't need a steel industry in the UK. And the emphasis has been in much of the conversations around the edge of the Brexit decision was we will make our own steel and we'll use our own steel, we'll buy our own steel. We won't be dependent on steel from other parts of Europe or other parts of the world. Now, we will, of course, still be trading on the international market, but it was a notion that our domestic steel industry would be one of the major suppliers to our manufacturing sector was fundamental.
A UK government spokesperson said they have engaged with businesses across the economy and have already increased the scope and scale of many of their support schemes, including loans to steel companies with a turnover of over £45 million. They say they're committed to supporting the sector's economic recovery, but no promises of support have been made yet, and it's industries like steel that had faced difficulties before the pandemic that look particularly vulnerable.